Hey everyone, this is Ben Cecchini, founder of Give and Grow, here with another episode of the Give and Grow podcast. If you're new to this show, this is where we talk with professionals in the mental health and counseling space to help parents raise healthy, loving, successful human beings. So today I'm super excited to introduce you guys to Emma Snope. Emma is a school counselor currently with her master's in school counseling and her undergrad in anthropology and sociology out of Asheville, North Carolina. So Emma, super thankful you're taking the time to share everything with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, of course. So just to reiterate for everybody, joining us potentially for the first time or welcome back if you've listened to this show before, we're really here to serve parents, to help them with some tools, techniques, maybe some information, education that you guys were unaware of previously that we really believe in and really believe can help you raise the kid that you're hoping to. Whatever you want for them, I know at the core there is this desire for healthy, caring, respectful, loving, successful kids. And so, yeah, just excited to pick your brain today, Emma, and
Yeah,
provide that to
absolutely.
everybody listening.
Sure.
So, just right off the bat, some parents might be tuning in because their kid might be struggling, with
Totally.
some of these skills. Can
Yeah,
you just share like what some of those early signs might be?
absolutely. Yeah. So, what I see in my work as a school counselor is that if some kiddos are struggling with social emotional learning skills, they might be easily angered. They might be exhibiting aggressive behavior. They might be withdrawn or unable to communicate. They might have a tendency to always say yes, so kind of a lack of assertiveness. They might struggle with empathy or trying to understand how their peers are feeling. They might struggle with self control. They might be in friendships where one of the friends kind of calls all the shots. They might be dealing with bullying. They might be struggling with dropping grades or attendance issues. So those are some that
Hmm.
come to mind for me.
Yeah, and in your experience, serving hundreds of kids, I'm sure
Yeah.
in your career as a school counselor, like what are some of the most common ones, or maybe even potentially like the most alarming ones?
hmm I would say struggling with anger and struggling with behavior and self control are super
Hmm.
common. And if that is left unaddressed, that can escalate into some less than pleasant situations.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. But I really appreciate that you shared that it's really common as well.
hmm
I know I was one of those kids that would have anger outbursts and they would be, pretty extreme or potentially dangerous for my siblings or my friends. And I wasn't really taught how to manage those emotions, or they were kind of just swept under the rug. So that's another reason why I've gotten into this work, is just to continue to share that, hey, these behaviors are normal. They're potentially
Absolutely.
not what we want to see in our children, but
Yeah.
they're normal,
Yeah.
and so for that specific experience, somebody who's having like struggling with behavior and anger
Mhm.
specifically, where do you kind of start? What's your sort of approach if you're working with a kid like that, that might a parent might be able to do as well?
Yeah, so sometimes I will teach them some deep breathing skills. I think that can be a place to start. If they come into my office really worked up, though, I would probably just let them work out some of that energy. Like I have a little hoop with a little ball that they can like toss in, and sometimes that helps them just to burn off some of that excess energy.
Hmm.
Often I will offer them like some water also because that can help to regulate their nervous
Hmm.
system. And I have some pillows and soft things that they can like throw or punch or whatever. I often
Amazing.
recommend kids finding something soft to punch because I want them to understand that it's not the emotion that's the issue, not the emotion itself, because we all experience a variety of emotions and that's normal.
Hmm.
Need all of those emotions. However, like it's not acceptable to express that emotion in a way that would like harm another peer or an adult. So finding healthy ways to release that anger. Sometimes some kids really like to like shred paper or like take like a fidget or a stress ball and just like squeeze that really hard. But
Hmm.
or like pushing against a wall or leaning against a wall can be helpful. Some kids just want to go for a little walk around the school. Like we have a sensory room that has all kinds of tools like a trampoline, like a little balance board. And so those are some of the strategies that I would utilize to kind
I
of
love
help them down. So,
I love that. I feel like I would have benefited so much from going to you as a kid. You got the basketball hoop. I'm ready to do basketball. Now I'm a breathwork facilitator. You're introducing them to breathing skills. Like the punching thing, like I literally bought myself a punching bag for moments like that where it's like, okay, I know I need to release this. So I'm so thankful that your kids in your school have you as a resource because I like personally use all of those methods that you talked about and they're so helpful. They're so helpful. So it can be like for a parent that might be thinking you're going to have them like punch the pillows and stuff like that, like can you just like break that specific one down a little bit more,
yeah,
for especially for any of those parents that might be like how is that helpful, or don't we
yeah,
want them not to punch?
for sure. It's more kind of redirecting your anger like in a healthy way, in a way that doesn't harm anyone. So, right, when we feel anger, it's like all of this intensity builds up in our body and it needs some place to go. And better
Hmm.
that be directed into like a soft object that won't hurt you or anyone else rather than like at another person that could get you in trouble, that could cause harm in various ways. So,
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just, I feel like being vulnerable on this call because you're hitting like a lot of my childhood, even my young adult, like 20s and things, like punching the hand sanitizer after a basketball game. It's like these things hurt ourselves and potentially can turn into harming others, introducing them to the pillows, to the bed. Do you ever do anything, maybe not in a school, but do you ever do anything with like primal screams or just like, that sort of thing?
I do, and something that I'll even do if I'm like in a setting where I'm maybe worried about noise is I might just go into the bathroom and I call it like a silent scream, and that like feels like a really satisfying like energy release. So I'll just sort of do like, and like it just like it gets it out, but like nobody's like concerned, especially if I'm at work. I don't want to be screaming, but
Right, right.
it does kind of get that energy out. So
Yeah, I've also done that. It definitely is helpful. It might sound weird, like how is that helpful? You're not actually screaming, but I think something to do with your physiology, moving your body in that way, even just like tensing up your muscles in that way, like you would with a scream. Like it's all but the release of the or the vocalization. Yeah, and that kind of brings me to your point around like the balancing stuff, like being able to get back into your body seems like a part of this experience as well, with the walk, with the stress ball sort of thing. And um,
yeah.
yeah, cool, Emma. I'm happy we're off to this conversation. So especially for anybody who has kids that are experiencing the intensity, as you mentioned, of that emotion. Um, Kind of like back to talking about emotions, or potentially for some of these younger kids, like parents, how can they help their kid identify and label their emotions, and why is that part of the process important?
Yeah, so there's a great tool that's called the feelings wheel, and it's categorized into a bunch of different emotions. And so it might have like anger, sadness, anxiety, and then within those categories, it would have sort of maybe the subtler emotions of like frustration or nervousness, or feeling scared or worried. And it really can help give kids vocabulary to be able to name more specifically what they're feeling. So I would recommend that resource because sometimes they're just like, oh, I'm feeling like this, but I don't know how to like say what it
Mm-hmm.
is, or I'm not sure what this is. And, so they can find the sort of general category that fits under. And then they're like, oh, maybe there's even a more descriptive word that might even describe that a little better. So it just gives them a bit more language for their emotions. So
Right. I love that. I've utilized that and similar things before. The general categories really help. It's like, okay, I know I'm in here, but it's not just like disgusted, right? It's like there's something else that's hard to put my words on. Oh, it's that, there it is. And it really helps, I think, also in terms of like the acknowledgement and the validation of that emotion. Like, here it is. I know, what it is now.
yeah, absolutely. I would also say a couple of tools that come to mind are like the zones of regulation. So that kind of can help kids identify um, like which energy level am I at. So like the really low energy is the blue zone. So like sick, sad, tired, bored, and then yellow is kind of um, well, green, you're calm, you're like relaxed, you're ready to connect and make friends and learn. And then yellow, you're starting to amp up, so you might be kind of worried, excited, anxious. And then red, you like flip your lid, which I'll talk about in a second. You're like totally out of control. So it's helpful for kids to be able to be like, I am in the blue zone or I'm in the red zone, and then um, learn which tools can help them because there's different tools that are good for different zones. And then as far as I teach my kids the hand brain model. So when they go
Hmm.
like this, that means like I flip my lid. And so I teach them that their thumb is the amygdala. That's like their barking dog or whatever their
Hmm.
warning alarm bell. That means that their emotional brain is taking over and they're not going to be able to think as clearly. And so then I have them go like this to show that this is your prefrontal cortex, this is your thinking brain. When you're like this, you're online, and when you're like this, you're not. So that's a really easy
Hmm.
cue to also give to an adult. And there's also the resiliency zone or the window of tolerance. So like um, if you're really amped up, then you're kind of bumped out of your window of tolerance on the on the anxious side. And then if you're really shut down or blue, you're also bumped out of your window of resiliency. So your window of resiliency is like similar to the green zone in the middle, where you can
Hmm.
just function at your best. And kids who have a lot of trauma, their amygdala, their barking dog is going to be going off a lot more often than kids who
Hmm.
don't. And they're also going to be bumped out of their resiliency zone a lot more easily. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, I really appreciate you breaking those down. I feel like both of those, even you just talking about them, but obviously using your hand and just, the windows, the zones, the different levels, is really helpful for just like identifying, right?
yeah.
Where am I at? And I may even not have the words to say where I'm at, but I know I'm out of my window of tolerance. I'm above it, I'm below it. I'm heading towards the yellow. I don't need to say like I'm feeling disgusted right now,
For
or,
sure.
or sort of thing. Here I am in a zone. I could see that being really helpful for a younger kid. One of the
Absolutely.
one of the follow-up questions I have for you, like whether you're talking about the zones of regulation
Regulation.
regulation and
Yeah.
window of resilience, like what is sort of your approach for potentially, I guess my question is more for the window of resiliency, like how are you able to help potentially grow that window,
Mm-hmm.
or make it so that you're not getting out, whether above or below that window, as often?
Yeah. I think the more supportive adults. a given kid has in their life that helps their resiliency zone. And even like having one really supportive adult can make a difference, because sometimes students don't have awesome home lives, and sometimes school is like their place where they feel safest. So
Mm-hmm.
first of all, trying to like make sure that they are safe at home, and if they're not, like working to address that.
Mm-hmm.
But also just trying to encourage them to make friends, and also connect with supportive adults. I think all of that helps us to be more resilient, because um, as adults, we're often expected to regulate ourselves, but really we have to be able to co-regulate before we can regulate ourselves. Like that's an earlier developmental skill, and sometimes that kind of gets missed for certain kiddos, and but it can also always be relearned later as well.
I really, really appreciate that share, and it's something that we haven't really. I mean, we've talked about co-regulation before on the podcast, but learning that that's one of the more earlier skills that kids get to learn is kind of news to me. And you know,
Yeah.
when I was asking that question, I wasn't expecting you to talk so much about basically the community, the village around the kid,
Yeah,
and how
for
that
sure.
can really support them in their resiliency. It just makes all the sense. Like if I'm really struggling, you know, in my zone of resiliency is small, if I get a teammate on board, a parent on board, a teacher on board, it's like, of course I'm more resilient
Yeah,
now. I got my team with me, you know.
absolutely.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really, really cool. So, you know, you talked about safety, and you talked about like
Mhm.
kind of relearning the skill of co-regulation. I'm definitely
Yeah.
curious about it. How
Mhm.
would you go about rekindling that safety at home, if it's not there, or if you just want to make it even more of a safe place for your kid? How would you do that?
For sure. I think if you like have a partner or a spouse or somebody at home and you're like parenting together, trying to ensure that that relationship is like as respectful as possible will really benefit the kid as well.
Hmm.
Um, and I think also parents having their own therapy and their own like close friends is also beneficial for their kid, because then they feel like a lot of their emotional needs are being met, because sometimes kids can sort of take on some emotional needs from parents, and I think when parents have their own like support systems, that also benefits the kid a lot. So yeah, I think really positive communication between the adults. Like I have a saying like don't speak out of anger, and that could be like if you're angry with your kid, if you're angry with a partner or spouse, it's really okay to just like take a break and be like, we're going to come back to this later. Like take a walk, take a beat, like do whatever you need
Hmm.
to do to like self-soothe, and then you can revisit that later, because once some things are said, they can't be taken back. And so I feel like if you are getting really escalated, it can be good to just like take a beat sometimes if you can.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world, and it's what you're doing with the kids when you have them, you know, in your sessions with them at school. And I know from my personal experience how beneficial that is, just to take a second. The problem doesn't need to be solved. The reprimanding or consequences don't need to be made
Yeah.
right in that moment. The scolding, you know, a lot of this stuff doesn't really even work in the long term.
Yeah.
You know, so I really just appreciate that invitation for everybody to slow down, self-soothe, or
Totally.
self-soothe,
Yeah.
you know, and then get back into the conversation. And it sounds like with the parents, the invitation of, you know, having your own therapist, practicing positive relationships, having those people that are supporting you is the same thing that we're doing for the kids. And that's what I've noticed through a lot of these conversations too. Like the tools that we're throwing out there for the kids, like if we don't know how to label and identify our emotions or
Yeah.
self-soothe or move anger, like our kids are gonna not be able to do that either, because so much of it is modeling, right?
Yeah, there's this ratio of like the 5 to 1. Some of this comes from John Gottman, who's like a marriage and family therapist, but the 5 to 1 basically means for every like criticism, like if you're in a conflict, give like 5 affirmations. Like you need 5 affirmations to kind of like offset that one.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's just criticism, criticism, criticism without that balance, it can kind of degenerate the connection.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I heard of that sort of thing, and it seems like 5 to 1. Like, okay, you really do have to be intentional about those affirmations and the gratitude even that you're showing your partner, your kids, and it's so much. It really does take an effort, you know, to do that. You know, because it's so much easier to lean towards the negativity or the criticisms or the judgments.
yeah.
It really does take a conscious effort. How can parents, kind of shifting gears just a little bit, like how can parents support their kids making and maintaining friendships, knowing how important like the relationships are in their life?
Absolutely. So I would say something that I do with some of my students is I'll have them role play, like inviting a friend to play or like asking a friend like questions about themselves. I'll have that like them role play that with me because sometimes they're just not sure where to start. They're like, "Oh, I want more friends, but I'm not really sure like how to make that happen." So sometimes in session that's something that we can practice, and I even have some of the inside out feelings like plushies that they can use as like little characters when they're like
Nice.
talking about their emotions, which they like. I would also say inviting children to look out for the shy or the quiet kids and inviting them to play because they are probably also looking for a friend, you know, looking out for the kids who might be being excluded, who could also use a friend.
Hmm.
And I encourage them to um, look for respect in their friendships and avoid friendships that are hurtful. So if a student is continuously picking on them, like obviously I will report that and handle that. But also, I would encourage them to like not give their time and energy to that person, and I'll kind of ask them like, well, who were you drawn to in the class? Like, who do you sometimes I'll call them like potential friends. I'll be like, is there anyone that feels like a potential friend? And then I'll ask them why, like, what makes them a good potential friend? And they'll say, oh, they're kind, they're respectful, you know? And then I just encourage them to like give their energy to those people who are treating them well and kind of give less energy to the people who are not doing that for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I really love the idea of role playing. As soon as you started talking about that, I immediately thought about just like writing. Like as these kids are learning to write, what do? They have to practice it. They have to practice writing. You know, it's the same thing with initiating a new conversation or, yeah, how do I make a friend? Like it takes practice and learning. It might come natural to some kids, but if
Yeah.
that's your kid that it's not really coming natural to, like these are skills. That's why it's social and emotional learning skills, you know? So yeah, I really appreciate that. And also the guidance around like what a healthy friendship is and what isn't, because you're really setting the tone for them making those decisions later on, by having those conversations early, and who do I want to surround myself with, and making sure they're not entering abusive relationships and those sorts of things.
For sure. Yeah, sometimes I'll mediate with students if they're in conflict with their friends. And the ground rules that I always kind of set are I'm like, let's try to avoid blame. So, not saying like you always do this or you never do this. Like, let's try to focus on one issue at a time. So they're not like, you did this, and then this other time you did this, and then this other time you did this. I'm
Mm-hmm,
like, slow
mm-hmm.
down. Um, and I also kind of like think of myself as a remote controller almost when I'm having those conversations. So sometimes I'll be like, stop, like pause, like sometimes I'll be like, back up, like they just said that they're sorry, like can we hear that and acknowledge that. And so that's been sort of a helpful like mental metaphor thing for me to have. So.
Yeah, yeah, that I can see that right now. I love that. Just being able to be okay, we can go back here. We don't have to just keep pushing forward or not address certain things, and especially for these young kids learning these communication skills, we can go back, correct, advise, give a suggestion on how to say it differently. And I think, I was having a conversation with a parent the other day of just like, I don't know whether to like correct it every time or just to like ignore it sometimes. And I think that was a really powerful question for me. I know I have my own thoughts on that, but I'm curious to know like your opinion in that sort of situation. Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think if they see it and they feel regulated enough to correct it in a way that would be beneficial, I would say that would be helpful. If they're already feeling super angry and aggravated, maybe like take a beat and come back to it later. So I think it also
Hmm.
depends on like the emotional state of the parent in that moment, and do they feel up for making this into like a interaction that will be productive and helpful for their kid, or are they just kind of um, not able to do that?
That makes so much sense. And I think it honestly kind of potentially answers the next question that I was going to ask you around like when things get emotion challenging or when things emotions get challenging and chaotic, like what is your advice? And just what I'm hearing in this previous statement is like, well, wait until you're regulated to really address it, because then it can be productive versus just like potentially habitual or something you learned from the past when things got elevated that you don't want to continue with your family or pass on to your kid. And anything else that you would like to like remind parents of to support them when things get a little
For
chaotic?
sure. Yeah. Um, I think something I was reading, because I've been doing some reading on attachment, and I think there's a lot of pressure on parents to be like perfect, essentially. I think there's a lot of like social and societal pressure for that. And I think that can be really, really difficult for a lot of parents. And I was reading a book on attachment that basically said if parents can be attuned to their children 30% of the time, that is kind of like the baseline for creating secure attachment, you know? So I think for all the parents out there maybe worried, oh, I have to be perfect. It's like if you can be attuned like 30% of the time, like you're doing great. And I think that like takes a
Wow.
little bit of pressure off of parents too.
Wow,
So,
I haven't heard that, and yeah, that definitely is like, oh, I could get a 30% on the test and like be like doing well. Like, I mean,
yeah.
going into parenthood, that's definitely like a little anxiety that is coming up for me of just like, am I ready in terms of like, am I going to be able to handle these situations and not pass on things that I don't want to be passing on, and teaching things that I want to teach differently. Am I going to be ready for that? And that makes me feel a lot more relaxed.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
yeah, so
For sure.
Emma, uh just thank you so much for your time and energy today. You definitely
Oh,
shared some things that we have not heard on the show before,
I'm
and I
glad.
yeah, and I just like really, that's what I love about it, right? Each episode has its own unique things, and you brought your uniqueness today, and I love your shirt, by the way, Inspire. That's
Oh,
what we're
thank
here
you.
for.
Thank
Um
you.
is there any place that people can reach out to you if they want to learn more or pick your brain, or if you have
Yeah,
any
for sure.
resources?
Yeah, I have a LinkedIn, so that's just my name, Emma Snope. So that's the main kind of, um, I guess, kind of professional presence that I have. So I'd be happy to like message people on there. I don't have like a huge social media presence, but I would be happy to connect on there. So yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. Sounds good. Well, once again, Emma, thank you. And
thank
uh,
you.
also to everybody that gave today a listen, thank you guys. Feel free to share this with a friend, a parent that you might think would find it helpful. And yeah, thanks again for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you.